On Thursday, August 23, 1945, a major disaster took place that destroyed over half the buildings on the campground. It could never be the same for any who experienced the great Alton Bay campground fire. Thousands had enjoyed the campground since its founding in 1863. It was started by a group of Christians who believed that the end of the world and second coming of Christ were near at hand. Crude conditions greeted those who came. Attendance was 1,000 to 1,500 during the first meeting, with good preaching and singing. The Civil War was underway, and Abraham Lincoln was at the midpoint of his presidency. Mrs. Lincoln was a chance visitor during the first camp meeting, as she was returning from a visit to the White Mountains. The railroad from Dover to Alton Bay had been completed 12 years earlier and made it possible for campers to come by rail from Portsmouth and Boston. Rates were cut to half fare for those going to the Alton Bay camp meeting. The campground site was railroad property, made available the first year free of charge. The camp meeting added greatly to the success of the railroad. The steamboats on the lake helped too. Lady of the Lake had been operating successfully for 14 years, the Dover for 12. Both brought hundreds of passengers to camp meetings. The largest camp meetings were during the years 1866 to 1880. By 1866, there were 40 wooden cottages and some 77 tents. A boarding house had been constructed of rough boards and removable canvas roof. Lodging was offered for 10 cents per night. The 1872 camp meeting was the biggest. 35 to 50,000 people were on the grounds on Sunday, with 5 concurrent preaching services provided. The first Mount Washington was launched a few months earlier and made 2 trips, as did the older steamer Lady of the Lake, to carry some 4,000 passengers to the grounds. The trains brought 6,500 more. There were 1,115 teams of horses that brought most of the rest. More cottages were built. Families grew so that by 1945, many campers were the second or third generation to know and love good old Alton Bay. Some 600 cottagers was squeezed into the several acres of core development. It was crowded, quaint, picturesque, and very, very special to those who came. Lifelong friendships were built. Lives found meaning and direction. Memories were collected. There had been fires before. In November of 1906, the old steamer landing and train depot were destroyed by fire. The new depot was constructed further up the bay the following year and still stands as a community center. Several cottages burned in 1913, but the fire was quickly contained. In 1900, the Camp Meeting Association Board had voted to purchase 100 Monarch fire extinguishers. In 1914, the Fire Claims Commissioner for the B&M Railroad wrote as follows: "We have received 1 or 2 letters stating that the condition of the campgrounds is such that there is great danger from fire if anyone should carelessly throw a lighted cigarette or cigar among the leaves and flammable material that are there. You, of course, appreciate the terrible calamity that would follow a fire in the campgrounds. And if you can see your way clear to have the dry leaves, etc., raked up and removed, we certainly will appreciate it. We would be more than sorry, as I know you would, to have a fire occur, and I hope you will give immediate attention to our request in the interest of fire prevention. In 1918, the Campground Board voted that the roofs of all new cottages built and buildings recovered after December 13, 1918, shall be covered with fire-resisting material. Camp Meeting 1945 was scheduled Wednesday, August 15 through Sunday, August 26. It was the 83rd successive annual session. The Second World War had ended the day before with the surrender of Japan. There was excitement about sons and loved ones returning home, and sadness about those who had been lost. The program looked good. There was much interest in hearing the morning speaker, a brilliant young professor from Gordon College, Dr. Edwin K. Gedney. He spoke each morning on subjects related to biblical prophecy.
In the midst of this pressure, in the midst of this tribulation, in the midst of despair, in the midst of a body of people watching the values of the world crumble into dust without apparent hope of any kind, Jesus gives this reminder that he is involved too, that he also is related to this thing. I come quickly, don't be discouraged. I come quickly, don't give up hope. I am coming quickly. These horrid things are not going to continue forever. I am coming quickly. Lift up your hearts. Gird up your loins. Establish your faith. Fix yourself upon the rock so that you can stand in this evil day. Put on the whole armor of God and never faint or fail, because I am the Lord after all. And the kings of the earth, as we go on through this chapter, we find in the 16th verse, yes, they're gathered to the place which in the Hebrew tongue is called Taber-Gedney. And the seventh angel poured out his bowl, and a voice from the temple, from the throne, said, "It is done."
On Thursday morning, August 23rd, most had come to the 10 a.m. service and heard him speak on the subject, the Kingdom Message. As the meeting ended, many lingered and engaged in friendly conversation. At the same time, at about 11:45 a.m., the fire broke out. The blaze started in the cottage of Mrs. Blossom Batchelder of Haverhill. She was cooking in her Manchester Avenue cottage and had left to attend a meeting. The stove apparently exploded, and within minutes her cottage was ablaze. The H.L. Falkingham cottage next door was soon engulfed as well. Strong wind from the lake fanned the flames, and they spread quickly. The fire alarm at the station was sounded by Charles Coolman, a resident whose cottage later burned. 5 cottages were burning when the Alton firemen arrived. Water pressure was weak and inadequate until pumpers from other towns arrived. Orland Farnham remembers it like this.
I was on my way back from the post office, pushing my son in a stroller, when all of a sudden it seemed like everything broke loose. Sirens were blowing, and I could see down the street a cloud of smoke. And, of course, there's only a short ways from the post office to the campground. So I hurriedly got back to our cottage as fast as I could and determined what was going on. And at that point, left my son with my wife and went on to see what I could do to help. At that point in time, I got on the end of a hose to try to help with putting out the fire, only to discover that there was no pressure in the hose line, and the water was merely coming out the end and dropping down, and in no position able to put out any fire. So we immediately left the hose, which was inoperative, and went back to the cottages to get our things out of the cottages and move them away as fast as possible. At the point in time, we only had one car there, which was my father's car, Dr. Farnham. My car had been left at home, and I had come up by train. So we moved everything that we could, clothing-wise, into the car for both families, both Dad's family and my own. Once we did that, we then moved the car off the campground where it would be safe, and then went back to see if there was anything else that we could do, knowing that there was nothing we could do about the furniture and things of that sort that were in the cottages because we had no place to put them. So we merely waited until the fire had gone out, and then a family in New Durham invited us down to their home to stay overnight that night.
Fire units responded from Barnstead Parade, Dover, Farmington, Gilmanton Iron Works, Guilford, Laconia, New Durham, Pittsfield, Rochester, and Wolfboro. A group of Concord firemen who were fishing nearby also joined in to help. One Alton fireman with a wooden leg lost a bolt in his ankle and was taken to a garage for repairs. Ralph Seavey was chief of the Rochester Fire Department at that time.
On this banking from the road, and it was covering quite an area. And the Wolfboro Fire Department was there, and I don't know how many, and they were all standing along by the road. We had to draft water out of the lake there because we didn't have no hydrants. And they was all, fighting the fire from the road. So when I pulled in, which I was trying to tell you who whether he's a ward or what he was, I should know him. I knew him well. So when he pulled in, of course, naturally, I always reported to whoever's in charge. And I said, what would you like to have us do? And he said, look, you know more about handling these type of fires and what you do. You go right ahead and do what you think you ought to do. So I looked up and I saw the fire was heading for the chapel up there. And I said, I don't have crew enough. I brought 8 men. And you know how that road up there. And I said, if I can get some extra hand, I said, I think we should head right up there and cut this fire off. And he said, well, you go right ahead. So he turned around, and I guess they must have been about 15 kids there, anywhere from 10 years old. They all pitched in, helped take the... They were great help.
What was it that you had them do?
Take the hose, we laid the hose out, and then as far as we could over there, and then we pulled it all by hand. Then it had to be taken up over that hill, up to where the chapel was.
So the kids help you lug the hose up the hill?
Yeah, that's right. They help drag it, so it's all hooked up, when you take it off the wagon.
Right.
See what I mean? And in the meantime, of course, the pumper went back and set in the lake and get ready to pump. And, and this is quite a coincidence. And so we got there just in time. The cottage was right in front of the chapel, was getting a fire, and we knocked it all down. And then we started working around on the top part of the hill and cutting it off from coming up, and which we ended right around old back in I call another bay.
Red Cross units from both Laconia and Wolfboro were quickly on the scene giving aid, food, shelter, and information. A physician, intern, and 4 nurses from the Huggins Hospital provided an emergency station and had 3 ambulances standing by. A public address system was brought by volunteers from the Wolfboro American Legion post. The University of New Hampshire at Durham provided bedding and cots. Scores of campground residents were accommodated Thursday night at the Alton Bay Inn. Dr. Charles O. Farnham's granddaughter, Carol Farnham Portier.
Well, I remember walking home from Bible school and suddenly finding everybody running in all directions. My mother came running towards me, and the first thing she wanted me to do was to hold on to my cousins. And the most important thing in my mind was I wanted my doll. And I remember staying there crying, but I want my doll, until they finally threw it out the window to me. And the rest of it was really kind of a blur, except that the one thing that has stood out in my mind all these years is how impressed I was with everyone helping everyone else. People were throwing all sorts of things, running ahead of everyone else and throwing everything they could out of people's houses and grabbing things that probably the people really didn't even want, but in trying to help everyone else. And I think that's what I'll always remember, is just how everyone else was so helpful.
B. Crocker recalls the experience.
Well, because most of us, it started down near the Grove, and so most of us up on our hill were trying to get things together and try to see what we could save in case the fire came up our way. And it was going so fast and furious that we thought it could easily. And so we were taking clothes. My husband filled the car with all kinds of things that we could possibly get. My boiled dinner went along with the rest of it. We took everything up on Spring Street, which we thought was a safe area to take things, and people were bringing things up. It was just like a pilgrimage. Everybody coming up Mitchell Avenue with sheets full of things, pillow slips full of things, all kinds of odds and ends they were trying to save. And so it was just like bedlam let loose. Everybody was rushing around trying to do what they could.
So what were some of the things that people were carrying as they came up the hill?
Well, one woman, she came up with just a bag of socks that needed to be mended. She just grabbed that and lost everything else in her home. Others piled all kinds of things. Salt and peppers and silverware, some dishes, and just piled all kinds of things. It seemed like people just didn't know what to do. They just tried to pile stuff in. But a lot of people brought a lot of their clothing and things like that. And up on Spring Street, it was just a line of all kinds of odds and ends of everything. But the people next to my cottage were filling 2 suitcases full of things that they thought they might be able to save. One had all their securities and bonds and money and things that were precious to them. They piled those all into one suitcase, clothing in another. So they took one suitcase up the hill and left it up on Spring Street. And before they could get the other one up the fire we realized it was not coming up on our hill. And so they came back and they found that they had taken the one with the clothes up the hill, but the one with all their money and everything had been left in the cottage. Everybody did things.
The fire raced from tree to tree and cottage to cottage. The Tabernacle, the Grove, the Lawrence, Lowell, and Portsmouth chapels, the Secretary's building, all destroyed along with the 300 private cottages. The superintendent of the New Hampshire State Police, Colonel Ralph Caswell, was among those whose cottages burned. Buzz Bezanson remembers the lamplighter.
Mr. Wilder was the prior to the fire, and at that time we had 40, 50, maybe 60 kerosene lamps that hung around the campground that were used for illuminating the various pads at night. as kids, when he got ready to go around at night and light these lamps, we would follow him. He would use these wooden matches, and after lighting the lamps, he would break them in half, make sure they were completely cold, and then just drop them sometime between lanterns or lamps. And all the kids that followed him would see who could have the most half pieces of wooden match at the end of the tour at night. And the following day, the one that had the most pieces from the previous night would get a free ice cream. And like I said, this was basically the illumination we had on the paths that wound between the cottages and down the roads. Then in the mornings, he would take his 5-gallon can of kerosene and he would go around and refill all the lamps that had burned dry during the night. So it was quite an experience, and this is one of the things that we lost, of course, after the fire.
Orland Farnham.
Only a sense of loss of many of the things that were there that were wiped out by the fire. We miss the grove that we used to have. We miss the additional chapels. As a youngster, there were a group of us that used to wander around from chapel to chapel, listening in on the various services and the different types of services that were held in each of the chapels. It was interesting to see the differences in the reaction of people at the different chapels to the kind of program that was being presented at each one of them, in addition to the big tabernacle where all of the evangelistic services were held.
The damage was placed at over $200,000. The news media were quickly involved. The major newspapers in Boston, Providence, Worcester, Manchester, and surrounding town newspapers provided front-page coverage. They referred to the fire as the worst resort disaster in New England history. Newspapers told of General MacArthur entering Japan with the occupation army, President Truman calling for resumption of the peacetime economy, of homes in Reading and Wakefield for $6,000 to $8,000, of the Boston Red Sox in lowly 6th place, Bob Feller, who had returned from the Navy to pitch for the Cleveland Indians, and of the terrible fire at Alton Bay. Later, Winifred Dyer of Elliott, Maine, wrote, "Thank God it came not in the night. Thank God that at noon it came when the campers were awake and alert on that terrible day of flame. The things we had feared for so long, that had oft seemed ready to strike, descended at last with surprise, sprang out on its prey, lion-like. Windswept, the blaze spread through the camp, leaving black debris in its wake. Close, crowded, the cottages fell, their occupants fled to the lake. From nearby and the more distant towns sped the firefighters brave. They struggled to check the swift flames, some part of the camp to save. At last, only heaven knows why, the great Holocaust did cease, with the elements quiet as though an angel had bidden peace. The tabernacle and grove were gone, the chapels and bookstands too. The sight of unnumbered cottage homes was a sad and dreary view. But the store was left in the boarding house, and the group on Beacon Hill. Up on Mitchell Road, while beside Back Bay stood houses intact, there still. In the midst of the disaster, some were already talking about rebuilding the campground. On August 24, one day after the fire, the board voted to rebuild within a 5-year period. The Rochester Courier urged community support. The spectacular fire which razed the greater part of the historic Advent Christian campgrounds at Alton Bay last Thursday afternoon was more than a local catastrophe. To some 20,000 New Englanders, this pleasant spot on the shores of beautiful Lake Winnipesaukee was a haven to which they could retire for a few days each year, and there commune with God in a temple of His own making, and according to their individual opinions of the way it should be done. For more than 3/4 of a century, the Alton Bay Camp Meeting has been a staunch fortress of faith in a widening sea of uncertainty. Everyone in this area, regardless of religious affiliations, shares a responsibility in making sure that the area is rebuilt. True Christianity knows no sectarian boundaries. In 1946, the board adopted a new statement of purpose that included an expanded summer program, not limited to a 10-day annual camp meeting and a July 4th weekend program as in the past. In June 1946, the board adopted a rebuilding plan prepared by the New Hampshire State Planning Board. A proposed plan for a new tabernacle was also approved. This was a time that called for extraordinary leadership. On August 19, 1946, Dr. Edwin K. Gedney, the pastor and Gordon College professor, was elected president. In 1947, the Daniel Moore Chapel was built and dedicated, and in 1948, work began on the new tabernacle. It was completed in 1952 and dedicated in 1953 as part of the campground's 90th anniversary celebration. The buildings were now in place to enable the program to move ahead into a new era. Paul Blanchard said, "Gone is good old Alton Bay as it will be remembered by thousands of people. But a greater opportunity awaits to build a new Alton Bay, more adequate in facilities, more appropriate for camp sessions, and better equipped to proclaim the message so beloved by those who were instrumental in laying the foundations which stood the test of time so long." The building continued and continues today with youth camping, winter retreats, camp meetings, Bible schools, and concerts. As the Alton Bay Camp Meeting Association makes its contribution to building the kingdom of God.